Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Treachery, Faith, and the Great River, which is episode 6 of season 7 of Star Trek DS9. This video is a Patreon requested video. It was requested by patron Quack Addict, so thank you so much, Quack Addict, for your support and all those who support me on Patreon. So, Treachery, Faith, and the Great River is the episode in which Odo is contacted by a clone of Weyoun, who is a bit different than the other Weyouns, as he doesn't agree with the war with the Federation. He wants to defect from the Dominion. However, there was another clone of Weyoun who was activated after him that is more in line with the Dominion's keeping, and he tries desperately to kill Weyoun, even if it means killing Odo in the process. So eventually, the good Weyoun sacrifices himself in order to save Odo's life. And there's also another plot where Captain Sisko tells O'Brien to get these stabilizers that's impossible to get in like 3 weeks, but Sisko wants it in 3 days, so Nog does all this trading behind his back, and he takes the Chief O'Brien's code and swaps all these things to try to do all these trades in order to get the stabilizer, and it looks like O'Brien's in trouble, but it all works out in the end. So, this was a pretty good episode. I do think overall, my feelings of season 7 is that the first half was rather weak, and the second half was amazing. The second half is where it got good, but the first half of season 7 I wasn't as big of a fan of. This is one of the standouts to me. This is one of the exceptions of that rule, where because this wasn't the first half of season 7, I think this is probably one of the strongest, if not the strongest episode of that season. However, and it's interesting getting into the title of the episode, because the title is Treachery, Faith, and the Great River. And this is one of the only titles I can think of that applies to both the A and the B plot simultaneously, and meaningful ways. I'm sure there's some episode titles that apply more to the A plot, but you said it could stretch the meaning, be like, well, you could say this also applies to the other plot, but obviously it fits more on one of the plots. But this title actually applies equally to both, because Treachery, of course, that applies a bit more to the Odo storyline with Weyoun, because they even mentioned Treachery several times. And also in this episode, they do shout out the titles a lot, because they mentioned Treachery a lot, like even when they were talking about Nog's Great River thing. Ron was saying, oh, it could be treacherous. So they're finding ways to slip it in. Of course, the word faith is littered throughout this episode. Faith was more of a strong theme in both plots, because with Nog, you had to have faith in the Great River that it would take him where they wanted to go, where, of course, with Weyoun, is all about faith. His faith in the founders as gods, his faith in Odo as a god, and Odo sort of questioning his faith. So that was a very strong theme in both. Now, the Great River, of course, that applies a lot more to the Nog thing, because he mentioned it directly, the Great River, whatever they call it, which is a myth about how, of trading things, that it'll all work out in the end. But it could also apply, this is stretching that one, could also apply to the Odo storyline, where he also has, he's also threading, it's a very loose definition there, but he's threading because he's trying to get away from the Jem'Hadar, and he's threading a very thin line, because he wants to keep Weyoun, but then eventually it comes to the point where it's not possible, so good Weyoun has to sacrifice himself in order to save Odo. So that I thought was pretty interesting. Now, this episode brings up, it introduces the concept of the Odo, the founder disease, which will become an important plot for the end of the season, for the end of the show. It will become integral into the Dominion War story arc. And so this is the episode that's first brought up, but it's obvious in this episode that they intended to take it in a different direction. And in fact, watching this episode again, I get kind of disappointed at how they never really followed up on it in the way that was implied in this episode, and instead it went a totally different direction with it. Because in this episode, the good Weyoun, I think he's Weyoun 6, I can't remember. I think the one who died was the one we know, the Weyoun we've seen throughout seasons, 5 and 6 was Weyoun 5, and this good Weyoun is Weyoun 6, and the evil Weyoun who came after him is Weyoun 7, if I remember that correctly. But anyway, the good Weyoun, Weyoun 6 I believe, was saying that Odo, once the founders are dead because they're dying from the disease, and Odo can become the Dominion. He can reshape the Dominion for purposes of good and become its new leader. And that's a very interesting aspect. I really wish that they did actually go that route instead of the route they went, and actually explore that a bit more. That would have been fascinating. But the route that they did go, and this is getting to spoilers for later in the season, but I'm assuming you've seen them all, is that they actually revealed that Odo did in fact have the disease, so he wouldn't be the last founder standing. In fact, not only did he have the disease, but he was responsible for introducing it to the rest of the founders when he linked with them, presumably in the 4th season finale when they turned him into a human. Because it was later revealed that it was part of a Section 31 plot, that they gave him this virus when he was on Earth getting debriefed. So this would be during the episodes like Homefront and Paradise Lost. And so at the end of the 4th season, when he went to the Great Link, he spread that disease to all the founders. Now this, to me, I don't want to cover this too much because this has to do with other episodes, but it's a very obvious retcon to me. They hadn't planned it for this at all. It's obvious they just thought that up in those later episodes. In fact, in this episode, I am 100% certain that this concept of the whole Section 31 Odo spreading the disease had not been conceived of. It was not considered. That's something that they changed or retcon for later on because they wanted to go in a different direction, where Bashir had to fight off Section 31 in order to find the cure for Odo, and then Odo now has the cure. He could then go in turn cure the other founders. Which, don't get me wrong, it was a very interesting storyline. I do really like the ending arc of the season, of the show, which one of my favorite aspects of DS9. So I'm not begrudging that storyline, but I gotta say, I really regret not knowing how they would take it if they went the other way, where if they never retconned it and they kept true to what this episode was saying, because this episode was heavily implying that Odo didn't have the disease. It was just strictly to the founders in the Great Link, so they would all die off, and then Odo would be left as in charge of the Dominion. In fact, there was a similar storyline done in the non-canon novels that take place after DS9 ends, where Odo and Loss, if you remember Loss, he was also in the 7th season episode, I think it was called Chamara. But anyway, Odo and Loss were the only ones they were on the Founder homeworld, and then, I don't know, something weird happened where the founders had believed in some god, some astronomical event or something happened, so the founders just all fucked off and just disappeared, left the galaxy, so it left Odo and Laws in charge of the Dominion. But that book ended on a cliffhanger, and I never found out how it was resolved, because then that whole book series, it was a continuing book series, but then it kind of disappeared for a couple of years, and when it came back, it jumped a shark, and it was total shite, so I didn't bother reading any of the books, so I don't even know if that storyline was ever followed up on. So I never got, not even non-canon material did I get to see what it would be like for Odo in charge of the Dominion. And I think it would be awesome to see that. I actually think that would have been a better way to end the series, but I suppose the reason why they didn't do that is because it was a bit telegraphed in this episode here, that if they did go that route, then you would pretty much know, there would be no surprises there, pretty much because Weyoun spells it out. And it would be kind of easy to win, too. The founders are dead. Now Odo's in charge. He's going to tell the Jem'Hadar to stop, and they'll stop because he's a founder. So that is too easy of a win. So I can't see why they went in the other direction and made it so Odo was also sick. But honestly, I really wish that they took it in this own direction anyway. Also, this episode was really interesting. It was really cool seeing a good Weyoun. And it actually, because I was watching season 4 to do my season 4 review, and I just watched the episode Hippocratic Oath, which deals with the Jem'Hadar who just broke his addiction to catch himself white, and he's becoming more honorable. And Bashir's conclusion at the end of that episode was that it probably was just like a birth defect. It was just a random mutation. And so this is kind of like the Vorta version of that, where it's not because Vortas aren't addicted to catch yourself white or anything, but it's just a random mutation that makes him not an asshole, that actually makes him honorable and realize how fucked up the war is and how fucked up the founders are. And it's funny because he still reveres the founders as gods, but he's taken all of that faith and that belief and channeled it into Odo instead of the rest of the founders in the Great Link, because he can see how fucked up they are. So that's a very interesting way to go. So yeah, it's just exploring the Vorta aspect of maybe their genetic engineering isn't perfect, and sometimes it will produce people who aren't assholes, and of course they're seen as by the Dominion as defective, and of course they create another Weyoun who's just as big of an asshole, so he wants to kill, and just Weyoun 6 and just thinks of him as defected, like it's just a fucked up version of the clone. Oh, we failed, but it depends on how you look at it. From Odo's perspective, it would be an actually good version of the clone. The clone's actually coming out the way they should, and having sort of more, I think he has more independent thought, even though he still reveres Odo as a god. And plus, I gotta say, I've said before, Jeffrey Combs is one of my favorite actors in the Star Trek franchise, let alone Deep Space Nine. And this episode is probably one of his best performances. It was absolutely amazing because he's playing two different versions of Weyoun simultaneously. He's playing the asshole, and then he's also playing this good version. And some of the scenes that he had with Odo, where he was talking about like his faith and how much like he believes in Odo, was amazing. He does such a good job. And with the scenes where Odo's trying to convince Weyoun 6 that he's not a god, or the founders aren't God, he's like, oh, you only think the founders are gods because they put that in your genetic makeup so you could serve them. And he's like, well, yeah, of course, that's what gods do. and just the way he was justifying it, I think, is really true to the circular arguments a lot of religious people have, to whatever argument you throw at them to try to shake their faith. They twist it and turn it into, well, of course. And they make it turn into a circular argument. They make it so it actually builds their faith. And some, like myself, may see that as just being a bit naive and stubborn and not willing to accept anything that they don't want to accept. But, I mean, not necessarily. I don't think that was what this episode was saying, though. It wasn't necessarily saying, because it does have the scene at the very end with Odo talking to Kira, and Kira thinks, oh, that was he died in such a great way for him to die, because he died with his god smiling down on him. And Odo's like, oh, please, don't you start with this. And she's like, what? I don't think you're a god, but I think the prophets are God, and to the Starfleet, they're just wormhole aliens. And to Weyoun, you're a god. That's what he believes. And so, the point is, I don't think this episode was putting down faith, not at all. In fact, if anything, it was kind of exploring the strengths and the aspects of faith. But it wasn't doing it in a black or white way, if you know what I'm saying. It's not saying religion's bad or religion's good. It's just saying it is, and this is what it is. And so the whole thing about the circular argument, not necessarily portrayed as a bad thing. I mean, you just take it as you will. The viewer can watch that scene and interpret it as they wish. It's not like Who Watches the Watchers, which was very evidently anti-religion. This episode most certainly is not. But it doesn't deal as much with religion as it does with faith. And of course this ties into the Nog storyline, because Nog has faith that the river will work for him. And here, this Weyoun 6 has faith that Odo is this god is the one who can save the Dominion, who can save the universe, basically. So that was a very interesting theme that was very strong for this episode. I think it did a very good job at doing so. And it's also interesting seeing Odo's side of things. As I mentioned, the ending scene, which was an amazing scene, by the way, where Kira's sort of spelling it out for Odo. It's really making him sort of question the way he views everything, because he just views Weyoun as an asshole, the Warders are evil, and he feels betrayed by his people. And again, this episode touches on how he still feels a connection to his people, but he can't support what they're doing. And so when he hears that they're dying, it does really devastate him. And so this is a really good character episode for Odo in that regard. And he goes through a character change, because he has to see things in a different way when he's presented with this different version of Weyoun, where at first he's being just as big as an asshole to him as always. But then he realizes that things aren't always what they appear, and that this Weyoun is actually capable of being honorable and having good intentions, actually having independent thoughts, even though he still views Odo as a god. And that scene at the end was incredibly powerful, when the Weyoun 6 was dying and he asked Odo to bless him, and then Odo did, because that was a huge step for Odo, because that's something he would never want to do before, even pretend that you have your blessing. But he could see that there was a good man, an honorable man, dying in his arms. So even if he didn't believe it, he felt that he needed to give this man what he wanted as he died. And as Kira said, that it was the perfect way for him to go, because with his God smiling down on him. And that was just so powerful. It was just and that combined with Odo finding out that his people are dying, it was just very touching, very powerful episode. Now, let me get into the subplot, or the B storyline, which I didn't hate. I do think that it brings this episode down a bit, though, because it's a bit comedic and a bit silly, and honestly a bit stereotypical. Even though, as I said, there are themes that tie into both storylines, particularly with the theme of faith. But it's kind of, I think it messes with the feeling, the tone of the episode, because you have this very serious storyline where Odo has this huge character change, very emotional, and has a very strong dramatic themes that work so well. But that's intercut between this silly, comedic, cliche story. So, I think this storyline with Nog and everything, I wouldn't mind it so much if it was coupled with another story that was more fitting, something that wasn't so dramatic. Even though, as I said, the themes of faith are in both of them, it's still... that's kind of flimsy, really, because, I have faith in the river. It's just silly. So I honestly think that the storyline should have been... I wouldn't say it sucks. So I don't think they should have done away with it altogether. They should have put it in a different episode that wasn't so serious and dramatic, my opinion. Because, the storyline is okay, but it's kind of stereotypical. I've seen other storylines or stories like this where, this guy has an assistant who's going off and he gives him permission and he does all these shit that gets him in trouble, but by the end it all works out. I mean, I think this is done in several forms, one way or another. So it was kind of typical, and it just feels like really cliche to me every time like something else went missing and they went straight to O'Brien. And it felt kind of fake for dramatic purposes. The way Murtaugh was like, "O'Brien, you," when he had nothing to do with it. It's just, "Oh, I gave Nog my passcode, my authorization. I should have never done that." It's just like. And then Nog's nowhere, he just disappears. He's nowhere to be found. And like when he is to be found, he's just like, "Oh, don't worry, Chief, we'll be okay." And then all of a sudden, just magically at the end, everything fixes. Like that scene where Siska returns and Nog's already there. So O'Brien shows up and Siska's like, "Oh, thanks. He's polishing the desk. What a great desk. And thanks for getting the graviton, blah, blah, blah." And just the whole way that's done, like Siska knows about this before O'Brien even knows about this. It's really silly, unrealistic, hard to believe. But, you give it some leeway for being a comedy. Some. But not a lot. As I said, I think it was an effectively funny storyline. So I didn't hate it. Also, I really like the fact that we're actually seeing Nog as a Ferengi. Because it seems like ever since he joined Starfleet, and particularly with Season 5 and Season 6, he, turned into a totally different character, and I think I talked about this before, that it's too hard to believe that's a natural character growth of adolescence. It felt very clunky, like the writer saying, "Let's turn this into a different character." He didn't at all resemble the earlier Nog that we've seen in the first 3 seasons. It just seems like they just made him to this hard-ass Starfleet cadet wanting to, I want to train and be awesome. But here, I think they really reconnect to his Ferengi roots and intertwine it with his new Starfleet persona. And this is the kind of Nog I would buy a lot more. Because this is the kind of Nog where it does seem like it's a natural progression from being the sneaky little kid who's a delinquent going in the first 3 seasons to a more Starfleet officer, but it's like it's more of a combination of those, whereas I think his portrayal in a lot of Season 5 and Season 6, it wasn't a combination. It was just simply, "Oh, he's a Starfleet guy now. Fuck that to whoever he was in the first 3 seasons. That has nothing to do with it now," which I didn't buy. Here they blend those two aspects, where you see his Ferengi side coming through, where he's doing all the trading, but he's doing it from a Starfleet perspective and to benefit Starfleet. So for me, that was a huge plus in the storyline. You know me, I usually don't like Nog, but I think it did work in this storyline. So I did like it. I just think maybe it kind of undermines dramatic tones in the other storyline. So anyway, my rating for Treachery, Faith, and the Great River out of 10 is a 9. Excellent. As I said, it's a really powerful episode. It deals really great with themes of faith, the faith that Weyoun has in Odo, the faith that Nog has in the Great River, and the faith that Kira has in the prophets, and how she can relate that to what Odo's going through, and how she relates to him in that regard. And actually, she has faith in Odo that he'll pull through. So that really works. And just, as I said, the acting was amazing with Jeffrey Combs, and it's a very powerful ending, just the way that he dies, and they have reveal something that will have lasting repercussions for the show. So really great storyline. The Nog stuff was good too, but I think it does bring this episode down a bit. Anyway, that is it for my review of Treachery, Faith, and the Great River. This was a Patreon suggested video, so if you would like to support me on Patreon, very much appreciated. It was very helpful. There'll be a link in the description below for Patreon. If you donate $1 a month or more, you get access to my video schedules of what videos is coming up. I have a video series of Patreon-only videos at the moment. I'm doing my top 10 most underrated movies of all time. And also you get a early release of a different video each month. And if you want to donate $10 or more, you can request any video you like for me to do, such as this one, and I will do it. So thank you so much for those who do support me on Patreon, and check if you want to. It would be very much appreciated. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. You can check out my channel for many more Star Trek videos, as well as many other videos and other shows like The Expanse, Game of Thrones, Lost, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.